Everybody, welcome to Stratosphere Lounge, episode number 19X. I think it's 189, 190, something like that. Nobody cares. I hope everybody's doing well. It's great to be back, as usual. And as usual, we got all kinds of fun things to talk about. I have not looked at the questions. That's also as usual. So, yeah, just a couple things around the patch here real fast. I wanted to do it earlier today, but I just got completely crushed with the time. I'm really thinking. Here's the problem I'm having. I wake up, I see something on the news that I've got, a couple of things to say about, and I think I ought to do that. And I do a little research on it. Then I start thinking about writing and how I'm going to write it, and then I start wondering about what this, and then I've got pictures to pull for the firewall, and it's 8-hour process sometimes to pull pictures, and I got to lay all those things in, and I got to do all the graphics background, I have to render the title scenes, all of this stuff. And by the time I'm at that place, the story's cold. It's pretty much gone. Hang on, video locked. Frozen images of Bill. Okay, hang on. Should refresh. Should be working. Let's see. Make it happen. Come on. Now I've got an ad. Okay. Some people say that they are not getting the video live on Ustream, and I am trying to work this problem. It looks like it's recording on my end. I'm going back to the comments section. Yeah, there we go. Okay, I think some people have it. Refresh. So if somebody could type in refresh into the comments section, just keep on doing that until happy times come. I'll be so happy to get rid of this. You have no idea. And here's something interesting. I just set it up to log in, and yeah, everything's good. I see it. I see it. I make sure I hear it. Let's see. Turn up my speakers. Something's going out. So I went to sign in for what I put on the Facebook post as the last show on Ustream. But in the eternal contest between good and evil, I was staring down IBM, which bought Ustream, and IBM has been telling me in loud letters with a big yellow box for a couple months now. You guys are saying no video, no sound. I'm sorry. If somebody could type in, please refresh. I got video and sound. There's nothing else I can do. So it's been screaming in big letters that your plan is about to end, and we are going to turn this into something new. And I don't want to beat up on IBM. IBM is a very important company, does a lot of great work, and builds some big computers. But when they're trying to get into the pop culture like this, which is apparently what they seem to be wanting to do, it's just, I don't know, it's just awful. They've decided to name this new streaming service. Are you ready for this? The originality is going to knock you down. Hang on now. Hang on. They're going to call it Watson, as in Dr. Watson, as in your assistant, right? Watson. Didn't Apple come up with a device called the Watson, or maybe that was the Newton I'm thinking of. I don't know. It just hit me like, oh, Watson, fabulous. It's a great title for 1998, really get on the hot end of this. And anyway, so Watson has been saying your free plan will end on July 31st, upgrade to paying membership, and I don't mind paying. As I've said before, but the problem is they don't want to charge a flat rate. They want to charge a flat rate plus viewer hours, and the numbers are not good. So you're either in at $99 a month, which I'm happy to do, or $999 a month, which I'm not happy to do. And So we're going someplace else, going to go to Twitch. Anyway, as I said, in the big staring contest, the ultimate battle between good and evil, I log in today to see that my page is now saying, warning, your Ustream plan will end July 31st, September 20th or whatever. So I think it's pretty clear what happened. It was a widely publicized battle of the Stratosphere Lounge versus International Business Machines. And we were staring each other eye to eye, toe to toe, about to go to full-scale nuclear combat with the Ruskies. And IBM blinked. Stratosphere Lounge 1, IBM 0. We all owe ourselves, I think, a very large, pat on the back for that. So there's that. Just checking on a couple other little things here. Mostly I wanted to kill a little time to make sure everybody was on here and watching. So we're some 6-7 minutes into the show. 6 minutes and 15 seconds to be precise. And the reason I can be precise is because of a guy named Jim Samples, who goes by the name of Aesop's Retreat, who many years ago, from the beginning I think, took this giant Gordian knot of rambling, which is the Stratosphere Lounge, and started putting time code markers on it, on his own time, and without any assistance from me, certainly. I would simply go and look at a Stratosphere Lounge article, and on YouTube, and I would see somebody had put the end times with a link to the end times on all the subject I covered in that mindless meandering wandering, and I was very grateful for that, and then found out later that he'd taken pretty much every single topic that I've ever done and saved it as a separate clip, for which I am enormously just astounded by. And it was revealed to me that Jim has lost his wife of almost 50 years, named June. And before I got this news, which I got earlier today, I mentioned at the beginning I was thinking about doing these little quick, shoot them on the iPhone and just upload them straight kind of thing. And I was thinking about doing one, and if it's still roughly news tomorrow, I'll do it tomorrow. And I was thinking about doing one on Occupy Portland. There's a point to this. So the left moves in, tries to get immigration, the ICE office closed there by just basically barricading it. It's kind of ironic that the people that are calling for open borders and no walls, first thing they did in their little camp was to put up walls and start making some walls. Anyway, I was thinking about doing a piece on that, and what the first headline I read was that they had to get hazmat teams to come in to clean up the filth. There was just so much just human excrement and everything that it was a toxic waste site. And this is what happened in New York and wherever else the Occupy movement has been. And I was thinking about this morning in the shower, because some of us take showers. And I was thinking to myself, this is a point for this, Jim. I was thinking to myself, if you were to with completely unbiased eyes, that old saw, some alien comes down, and if you were to take 100 people out of a Tea Party group and 100 people out of an Occupy group and send both, one pair of each, one person from each, to 100 different psychologists, so that 100 different psychologists, not knowing any of the background, they don't know who they're from, how they've been selected, nothing, 100 different psychologists have a chance to compare the Tea Party person with the Occupy person. Again, completely, nobody's saying what they're doing, nobody's talking about their politics. Just give them a basic fundamental psychological rundown. Then I think the score in terms of who would be judged the healthiest would be 100 to 0. That the Tea Party conservatives in every one of those cases would be found to be enormously more psychologically sane than the Occupy people. I'll bet it's 100 to nothing. I wouldn't bet my life on it. I'd bet my car on it, though. And before I got this news today, I was just thinking about this, and I've mentioned this occasionally, but the truth is I cannot tell you the joy I get from meeting people who've been attracted to this work for reasons still unknown to me. The greatest, absolute greatest honor of my life has been not being a little bit famous. It's been being a little bit famous with the kind of people that I'm a little bit famous with. I have moved in some very dark places for many, many decades. And I don't mean just psychologically dark. I was in some bad places. And I've also spent during those years a fair amount of time with the whole Hollywood crowd and believing a lot of what they believed and so on. And the contrast between the two people is so astonishing. The contrast is so extreme that I realized that this show and all the work I do is, I don't want to say it's a collaborative effort with the people who've been following me, but it is without question a symbiotic relationship. And what I mean by that is, I'm not the person I was when I started doing this. The people I've come in contact with have made me so much of a better person than I used to be that I was not capable of doing the things I'm doing now or seeing the things that I see now. I certainly wasn't capable of ever being married when I started doing this. The contact I've gotten from you people over the years has been responsible not just for the work I do, but it's been responsible for turning me into a human being when I was a long, long way from that. And Jim, I'm going to all this trouble to tell you that it's people like you, and I'm sure your wife as well, who went to the trouble to do things like that for no selfish reason whatsoever, just because they thought people should hear it. And it's not a trivial thing. It's a lot of work. I've always known it was a lot of work. So I was sitting outside last night with my wife, Natasha, who's watching now. And we were talking about things, and, you know, we'll have met each other 2 years ago on Friday. And we both talked about how unimaginable our life would be without each other, and simply, I don't really care where I am or what I'm doing, so long as she's there, I'm happy. So when I hear that you've lost a wife of 48 years, which is pretty much most of my life, I simply cannot imagine what it's like. So as a person who's never suffered that kind of loss before, I have poor ability to console you, Jim, but I'll do my best. The things that have always helped me in these times are two or three just very simple things. Not that you need my help on this, but I think the thing that I always try to keep in mind in a situation like this, when the grief and the sadness just threatens to overwhelm me, just put me out. I just don't want to get out of bed. I just want to stay and sleep forever. My first thought always goes to, well, what would the person who I'm grieving over want me to do? If you believe that they're watching you now, and I do believe that, then what would they want? If they were the most important person in your life, as certainly June was, and certainly as my wife is, I would feel an obligation to her memory and to her person to do my level best to try to live as happy a life as I could. No one's ever going to get over a loss like that. That hole's never going to go away, never going to be filled. But I would hope that you keep in mind that while you can't do much about the grief you're feeling, your wife would want you to not dig yourself any deeper, and to get out of that hole as quickly as you can. You've still got time here for reasons that are not known to you or me or anybody else. I am 100% convinced in my heart, I don't have the physical evidence, but I just believe that you certainly will see each other again. What I do believe, having studied the physics of it quite a lot, and scientists' inability to explain time, how time itself is a mystery, it doesn't really belong with the rest of this stuff. More and more it seems that time is a perception issue that we have. And that means that all of the time you spent with your wife is still there. You've carved your initials, both of you, you've carved your initials into the universe. I personally believe that the time you spent together has never gone away. It's always been there. It always will be there. There was no before or after. It was just there. The decisions you made baked into the structure of time and space. And so the time you spend together is as real as this moment that I've just mentioned, which is already in the past, and certainly as real as the moment that's coming up now. Gone. So I would just simply say, 48 years of marriage, you must have made some astonishingly beautiful and long-lasting grooves in the fabric of our universe. You've certainly done it in the fabric of my life. It's been one of the things that has constantly kept me going, is just the quality of the people I meet, every single one of them, every one of them. And you above virtually everyone, Jim. And the only other thing I could possibly add to that is this. It's almost impossible when you lose someone or something to not feel some guilt about things, maybe things that you shouldn't have done or things that you did do or things you should have said or didn't say, or maybe secrets that you kept and wanted to reveal. What I believe is that if that is the case, June knows all about it now, and she knows your heart. She's known your heart from the beginning. So if you feel like there were things that you didn't say or do or wanted to, I completely believe that she is well aware of all of these things, and certainly is now. So to say you have my condolences is beyond my ability to say anything. It just sounds trite and silly, but you have my condolences, Jim, and as a person who just recently got married after 57 years of being a bachelor, 56, something like that. It's taken me better part of a century to finally understand just the outside, just the shadow on the wall of the cave of what being married is, and what finding that person who's right for you is, and what it does for you. By weird coincidence, Natasha and I were talking about this quite a bit last night, that not only had we not had these feelings before, we just didn't know that feelings like this existed. I just want you to know that on behalf of everybody who's watching the show, watch the show, the literally dozens of people that tune in weekly, and there I am being arch and ironic again, when in point of fact, Jim, as a general rule, 4,000 or 5,000 people watch this show on YouTube, and they're guided to the parts they need to find because of the work that you've done without being asked to do it, without any help from me, and certainly without any pay. It's been a big part of our Star Citizen experience as well. And the best news is also pretty much in character, and you're going to have to forgive me for looking down because I would rather get this right than pretend like I know what I'm doing. Sorry, 1 second, Jim. Yeah, I want to make sure I get this right. So, if you're one of the people watching this, if you're one of the people who have benefited from this man who you don't know spending his time away from his wife to catalog and to list and to, pull and edit and all the rest of it, all of these clips, there is a GoFundMe page that has been set up in June's honor. And knowing Jim, it doesn't surprise me to find out that it is that all monies raised through that GoFundMe project is going to go to the Wounded Warrior Project, which I am the proud shirt owner. So we're going to put the link to that down below here on the YouTube channel, and I'll put a link to it on the Facebook page. And Jim, this is the last thing I can think to say about it. I don't know how old you are. I imagine you're roughly the same age as me. I noticed from your avatar from the longest time, it looked like it was 9th Cavalry shield. When I've had to lose a few pets, I don't mean to equate the two. I don't want to be that's violently reprehensible. It's not what I'm doing. It's just that these are the closest losses that I've had. Animals have been my companions for my entire life. I haven't met anybody really for me until I met Natasha. And when I face the fact that they go away and I have to deal with it, 7th Cavalry, sorry, beg pardon, that was a bad error. 7th Cav. When they go, Jim, and when I have to make that trip down to the vet, I remind myself that that this is what they cost. This is what it costs. You can avoid the pain of this, but you would lose the 48 years. This is the price. And the more you get out of it, the more it's going to cost. And I think if we go into things knowing that, it makes this, if not easier to bear, at least a little less astonishing and gobsmacking, all of the people I love and all of the things I love and the animals I love and all the rest of these things, people, especially all of it. It brings so much happiness to me, and I know the time is going to come when, when I'm going to lose some of them, and that's what it costs to have them. That's the deal. It's the way it is. You can not go through the grief of losing them. And the cost of not going through the grief of losing them is not having experienced them at all. And I don't think that's a bargain you would want to make. It's certainly not a bargain I would have ever made under any circumstances. I've been married for 2 years. It's changed my life. We've been married for 48. And you're a good man, Jim. And I know June must have been a very good woman because she managed to straighten you out somehow. And we're going to miss her, and we're going to be thinking about you all the time. And we're going to be with you if you need us. The Strata Loungers is a pretty small subgroup of a kind of an obscure internet pundit anyway. But as Cheryl Toomey said when she sent me the letter this afternoon, we do take care of our own, and you are not just one of our own, Jim. You're the guy. You're the guy. Aesop's Retreat and never failed to amaze me and inspire me and fill me with tremendous honor and gratitude and make me want to get up and do this again. So there you go. Don't hesitate, Jim. If there's anything I can do for you, I'll link to these things afterwards. I'll put a link up tomorrow morning when it's going to get the best traffic. But if there's anything else I can do for you, for God's sakes, man, don't hesitate to ask. You've done so much for me, I don't even know where to begin. Okay, well, that will be it for the time being, I suppose. So let's go to the questions and see what we have here. Most relevant comments. It doesn't even give the thumbs up anymore. Most relevant, new, add all comments. Are you gonna give them to me? No, there's no more. There's, at least what I'm seeing, there's no more thumbs up. There's no more anything. It's just completely, utterly random, and looks like they've changed it again. So I'm just going to go with where we were most relevant. Excuse me. Here we go. Jared Bennett, new name for us, asks, what do you believe will be the long-term effects of the Democratic Party shift towards more extreme candidates like Ocasio-Cortez? That's the openly socialist former bartender who's working now as the rising star of the Democratic Party, openly socialist, talks about the failure of capitalism. And I can answer your question, Jared, by simply quoting Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, who believes that we should be occupying airports, we should be occupying shopping malls, we should be stopping cars on the street, we should be doing whatever it takes to bring attention to this cause that we think is important. And my response to that is, please, from your lips to God's ears, please, 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 please do it. Please, please, please. There's nothing that's going to rally more people to your cause, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, nothing going to rally more people to the cause of socialism than making air travel more difficult for Americans. And having a debate with a bunch of friends of mine, Evan Sayet, many among them, about this feeling I've gotten within the last month or two. And that feeling is that we have passed peak progressivism. It's not as good as it sounds. In the summer, in 1942, the U.S. Navy fought the Battle of Midway. That was the turning point of the war. That was peak Japan. But almost all of the casualties came after that. So even though the war was won, there was still so much damage to be done and undone. But I get the feeling that something has shifted in the continental shelf of public opinion beneath our feet. That people have had enough of this, and that the many liberals that are out there who are people of goodwill, who always thought that being a Democrat was the kind thing to do and the right thing to do, are now looking at television and they're seeing students burning down universities because a 150-pound gay man wants to speak there. And they find that the people that are wearing black masks and beating people on the streets and smashing windows and burning cars, those are their guys. That's their team. And they're finding out that the people that are leaving these parks, Portland is an extremely liberal city, maybe with the possible exception of Seattle and San Francisco, the most liberal city in America. And the people around there are saying, well, it's a little unfortunate because we kind of in sympathy with these people, with these protesters, but they're not in sympathy with the messages that they know, that they use. And when somebody on your own team has literally now, without exaggeration, kind of just, taken a crap in your stairwell for weeks and months at a go, you got to ask yourself some hard questions. I can tell you with confidence that if the Tea Party had been 1% as racist as it was accused of being, I would not only be a member of the walk away from the Republican Party movement, I'd be one of the leaders of it. But as I said earlier, they're not. The teams are not equal. Occupy people and the Democrats and that candidate, Ocasio-Cortez, represent, just forget the politics. The people that believe this, the people that like this, are the people who who basically barricade themselves in a public park and just defecate in the open. And the people who are opposing them are people who leave a park or a meeting area cleaner than it was when they got there. They go in, Tea Party people go in, and they take trash out with them. They don't only take their own trash out, they take other people's trash with them. And more, this to me is becoming even bigger issue than the politics. It's the quality of the people, and it's moral quality and it's spiritual quality, but there's nothing metaphysical about it. They're just better people. That's all there is to it. They're better neighbors. They're smarter. They're better educated. They're certainly more charitable. Their families are happier. When I say they, I mean ours. All of them. They're just all kind of terrible people. And when I was mentioning earlier about taking a sample of 100 Tea Party members and 100 Occupy members and having a psychiatrist do a rundown on them, psychologist, I would be asking questions, as I'm sure they would. I would ask Tea Party people and I'd ask Occupy people, tell me about your parents. What was your father like? Tell me about growing up. And I think you would find virtually without exception that the Tea Party people are coming from largely loving homes and are generally speaking well-adjusted, and that the people from the Occupy movement, generally speaking, are not. And it's almost, sorry, somebody wants to see the full front of the shirt. Sure. There you go. And more, I'm beginning to think that rather than politics forming your attitude, I think your attitude goes looking for politics. I'm really becoming more and more convinced of this. I used to think that liberals were these kind of people because the bad ideas made them that way. But then I more and more become to think, no. I mean, I was a victim of those bad ideas and the groupthink. I never heard the other side of the story, but I was never a bad person. I've done some dark things for a long time, but I've never hurt anybody, and I've never infringed or impinged on anybody. All the damage I ever did in my life was to myself, as best as I can recount. I certainly never intended to, if that's certainly the case. So often I think about people like Ocasio-Cortez and their followers. I had this thought again last night, strange coincidences. And I thought, Bill, this morning as I was getting ready to go to work, your job, Bill, is to protect people you can't stand from getting what they want. That's what you do. Your job is to go out there and try your very best to make sure that people who you absolutely loathe do not get what they want. Not because I don't want them to have it, because they don't want to have it. The best punishment for people, and that's the only word for it, because if they don't get punished intellectually, I'm not talking about physically. If there's no intellectual punishment for believing in things like socialism, then of course you believe in things like socialism. So when people say, what would you do as socialists? If you ask the socialists what they would do with conservatives, I'll bet you 5 out of 10 would tell you just line them up and shoot them. Me, I'm not made that way. My punishment for socialists would be simply go and live for a year under the system that you want to bring here. That's if I was a judge, that's what I would do. And if we taught anything in high school, if we had an educational system that wasn't intentionally destroyed by the left so that they don't know what it's like to live in these systems, then we wouldn't have to have people go there and live there and sentence them and all the rest of it. They would simply realize what a murderous, awful, low, immoral system it is. They always talk about how moral it is, how easy it is, how friendly it is, how human it is. It's none of those things. It is an immoral system of coercion that encourages hatred, envy, and victimization, divides people along the most primitive tribal lines that were capable of having what you look like, what is your skin color, dividing people who had come together to form a super tribe that was the most successful super tribe in the history of the world, that certainly fell short of its stated ideals, but its stated ideals were, in fact, inspirational. All men are created equal, and the socialists have decided that that idea has to go, and that this thing has to be destroyed. And the reason that capitalism and America and democracy and all the republic, all of it, has to be destroyed is because this system rewards merit, and the people that hate the system the most are the people who are the most envious of other people's achievements and merits. They are people that want the rewards that the capitalist system provides. They see people driving nice cars, nice apartments, and these people want all of that, but they're too lazy or too stupid or too both to go out and do the work. And so therefore, they are attracted to this political philosophy that says you don't have to work at all. All you have to do is vote for me, and we'll take their stuff from them and give it to you. It's just it's strong arm robbery is what it is, with one person standing between you and the victim, and that person is the Democratic Party. It's not even the government. It's the Democratic Party, and this is what this woman represents. And I genuinely think she's so stupid she has no idea that this is what she represents. I don't know what her background is. I think I've heard she might be Puerto Rican, but I would remind her, once again, the story I have to say all the time, that basically says people are risking their lives and losing their lives to get in rafts, to go 90 miles through shark-infested waters, to leave socialism and come here. There's not one single raft in the history of this country that has ever gone the other way, not once. Sometimes people leave America, but nobody's ever risked their life to get out of America, and people are risking their lives to get into America all the time, all the time. So I think you should take this theory that you keep trying to inflict upon the human race. It's like the plague, and I don't mean like figuratively like the plague. No, it's literally like the plague, but I mean that literally, in the sense that socialism is like the plague to the degree that there's a terrible outbreak of it, and millions of people die. And families are ruined, and lives are ruined, economies ruined, Europe's population's cut by 1/3, farms lie idle, everything falls apart. And the only people that are alive are the people that have survived the plague, and they're immune to the plague. And so they've developed immunity to the plague, and they don't have to worry about it until 2 or 3 generations later, sometimes maybe just a couple years later, that immunity is lost and the plague comes back. And I don't know how many waves there were of bubonic plague, just as one example, through Europe, but there were many over the course of hundreds of years. And this is what this thing constantly reminds me of. It's like, you were doing what? Yeah. I say let all the rats with all the fleas we possibly can run everywhere. That would make society much better. No. This system has killed people. Everywhere it's been, it's killed people or ruined societies. And when I say killed people, you say, well, what about Sweden? Well, what about Sweden? Have you met a Swede? I've met some Swedes. They are, on some level, to me, I don't want to say spiritually, what's the word I'm looking for? All of their potential is gone. All of their potential, and there's some very, very smart, well-educated, hardworking people in Scandinavian countries. But because of this system, the very best thing that socialism has done is not put people up a wall and murder them, but it has murdered their sense of individual achievement. It's murdered their sense of individual accomplishment. I did American exceptionalism video back in 2011. Numbers have changed a little bit since then, but this one hasn't. You go to Wikipedia and look at a list of Swedish inventions, and you're going to find since the turn of the century that the Swedes have invented the spherical bearing and the kidney dialysis machine, both of which are lovely things to have. But that's it. That's all. And when you think about the number of well-educated people, how well-educated they are, how smart they are, and how peaceful they are, you would think that Sweden would be leading the world in everything. They don't have the burden of crime. They don't have the burden of violence. They don't have the burden of none of that. You know, they are on the surface to many people this ideal society, but they're completely inert. And I noticed this when I was I don't know, 18, 19 years old in nightclubs in Miami. They're just inert. And And that's kind of a form of, kind of a spiritual death. Now, of course, the bill has come due. You can live on borrowed money for a while, but then the debt comes due. And all of the things that people love about Sweden, all the things that these progressives love about Sweden, and there are many things about Sweden to be admired, certainly. Certainly, it's very nice to live in a place that's spotlessly clean. It's very nice to live in a place where everybody's well educated. It's very nice to live in a place where people are polite and decent. Nobody does anything harmful. That's all just grand. Swedes in America behave that way too, by the way, which is why the Midwest is such a nice place. But when you get down to it, the Sweden that these college liberals and social justice warriors are calling for, that Sweden doesn't exist, and it hasn't existed in certainly 10 years, and maybe as long as 20 years. Sweden is no longer the place of blonde women in miniskirts, out dancing until 2 a.m. People think that Sweden is ABBA, and it's not ABBA. It's ISIS. Because they had to import people to keep this giant welfare state running. It is an unsustainable, irony in that word, it is an unsustainable system. And I'm paraphrasing somebody, I don't know who it was, I never remember it. At least I try to make sure that nobody is claiming this, that I took this for myself. I'm combining two things I heard into something that I think is original. And basically, when you look at our immigration problem on the southern border, we have that immigration problem because there are some jobs that Americans won't do. And since there are jobs that America won't do, we have to import foreign workers to do them. And one of the things that Americans won't do is vote Democrat. They're just not willing to do it in big enough numbers. So since not enough Americans are willing to vote Democrat, we have to bring in foreign workers to vote Democrat. And that's the absolute truth. If their theory was really popular and as human and as connected as what's her name says it is, then they should be cleaning our clocks. We should be the ones who would be arguing, no, it's not the will of the people. We have the courts to protect our rights. The courts aren't here to protect our rights. The courts are here to legislate socialist left-wing legislation that they cannot get past the people. And if you look at how the left governs, this is why the Supreme Court is so important, although the only people we have to blame for being in this spot is us. If you think about it, the way the left is governing and trying to govern and has been forced to govern has been either through executive orders or Supreme Court rulings. And what do these two things have in common? Well, the one thing they have in common is they both circumvent the people. They both go around the will of the people. The will of the people is expressed in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And God knows there are many times when this is not exactly a flattering portrait. However, with that said, it is the will of the people. And if there are a bunch of rapscallions and liars and crooks, well, that's welcome to the world of politics. But the reason that Obama would issue executive orders on things is because he couldn't get the law passed the way he's supposed to get it passed. And the same thing with the courts. If they can't get laws that the American people want and will vote for, then they go around the people and they have the Supreme Court do it. And when you get right down to it, you're talking about two different kinds of government. Not what the Democrats might do or are thinking about it. What they have done historically, especially under Obama, is they've given up, the Democrats have given up the idea of democracy. They don't like democracy. They think democracy is dangerous because the idiot people out there can sometimes vote against things that they want. And since they're so much smarter than everybody else, sometimes that's bad. So the Democratic Party, Democratic in name only, has been governing through executive orders or Supreme Court decisions or both. Well, there's a term for these kind of governments. A person who can simply write an order and have that order become law, one individual who is not divinely descended from other people and enjoying the divine rights of kings, that person's called a dictator. They dictate the law into an executive order, And the law becomes a law. Doesn't go past Congress. The people never get to approve it. He simply dictates it to be true, and so it's true. It's law now. Now you have to do it. And forget about the laws, all these regulations. They're also dictatorships. They are one person or a group of unknown people making something into law without getting that law passed by the people. And the people are only obeying these laws because we have this social compact. We vote for you, and we agree for you to represent us. And if you represent us, then we will basically follow the rules. But when you abdicate this power and when you don't, what's the point? No wonder people are failing to believe in the system. I'm failing to believe in the system. I need to see people go to jail. I want to see people go to jail. I don't care if they're Republicans or Democrats. I want them to go to jail. Hillary Clinton should be in jail. Barack Obama should be in jail. To my utter disgust, the upper levels of the FBI should be in jail. And I feel so sorry for the good people of the FBI, the huge majority of them out there who've watched the agency they love and the work that they've done for their entire lives be tarnished by the political machinations of these horrendous, awful, dishonorable, disgraceful people like Strzok and Comey and all the rest of them. We have no one to blame but ourselves, Jared, for allowing this thing. That's why last week's show on that woman, I get to pick the titles for them generally. And instead of me saying, socialist wins in, New York or New Jersey or what was it? It's like, is this some kind of sick joke? Is it? How many times are you going to foist this on us? How many times is the plague going to have to come back before we realize maybe next time that a ship pulls up on the dock and before they actually throw the lines over, if we see everybody in there is covered with these pustules and on the deck dead or dying, maybe we shouldn't let that ship come ashore. Maybe we got to just tow that ship right the hell out to harbor and make sure that whatever happens, it does not get ashore. But that's how the plague is spread, and that's how it's always been spread. And that ship keeps landing, and people keep dying, and we continue to bat ourselves in the head with the same 2x4 again and again and again and again. Okay, Daryl Green, good names I don't usually see too often. It's nice we're not doing the oligarchy of the comment section. Dictatorship for people with executive orders and an unelected oligarchy for the Supreme Court. The Democrats can't convince half of the American people. They can't convince half of 320 million people to do something. But if they can convince 5 out of 9 people to do something, then they don't have to go to the trouble of convincing 200 million Americans. You see how it works? It's much easier to get 5 people on a court than it is to get these ridiculous ideas past the American people, no matter how much they lie and no matter how much they have the tail at their wind at their tail with the media and so on. All right, let's see. Daryl Green, the usually super liberal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has recently made a couple of rulings favorable to the Second Amendment. How did that happen? Well, my first thought, Daryl, is that a stop clock is right twice a day. I have to tell you, I've heard this. I don't know what the rulings are. I can't give you an intelligent answer about it. I don't think they're changing. And yet, I was talking a minute ago about this idea that maybe we've passed peak progressivism, that it's going to continue to get worse before it gets better. But we've reached the 7th wave of the 7th wave. The high water mark is reached. It's just starting to ebb now. I found to my amazement at Freedom Fest a couple weeks ago in Las Vegas, I was talking about the game project, and still waiting for that video, by the way. Known miscreant. The person who shot it immediately went on one of these conservative cruises, and they got 24 baud dial-up on the ship, and so she can't upload the video for me. I'll get it probably around August 1st. But at Freedom Fest, after I talked about this idea of the video games and so on, I had a young guy come up to me and say, for the life of me, I cannot believe if I remember. I'm virtually positive it was Facebook. It was Facebook or YouTube, one of those, but I'm virtually sure it was Facebook. And this guy came up to me and said, "You know who you ought to talk about? You ought to talk to this? Who you ought to talk to about this?" I said, "Who?" He said, "Facebook." I said, you don't have to be, no need to be cruel, man. If you don't like what I have to say, just tell me. No, he said no. Facebook is looking for conservative content because they're so stung by these criticisms of them suppressing conservative content. Now, I don't know if that's true. I believe that this guy believed it. He works for Facebook. He says I'm surrounded by liberals all the time, but this is what they're saying, that they have to do something to square it out. If that is true, it's undoubtedly a financial consideration and nothing to do with the morality of being fair or letting two ideas go at it unencumbered. But that doesn't mean it's not happening. It might be happening. It might be that the financial pressures and the criticism and all the rest of it are getting people seriously thinking about leaving Facebook, and so it's possible. I mentioned the Facebook thing because if the Ninth Circuit Court makes a favorable ruling, it's possible that people have had enough and that this walkaway movement is real, that there's really something there. Now, again, if we had half a brain, meaning the Republican Party or conservatives in general, it's like trying to herd cats. But what we really ought to do is we ought to start a walkaway movement from the Republican Party. And then we ought to talk to the people who are in the walkaway movement from the Democratic Party. And if you were to start a movement where people of goodwill and common sense were just walking away from both the Republicans and the Democrats, then you would have the ability to create a political party with a platform that 80% of Americans would vote for. Wouldn't be one of these 51-49 elections. It'd be 80-20. And this would be the time to do it. But, sometimes I see things that seem clear to me and there's not anything I can do about them, but that's the way it goes. Moving on, Joseph Talbot says, what do you think of my handmade pocket color chart? Should I try selling it on Etsy? Accompanying which is a picture, which I highly recommend you go and look at on the Facebook page. And it is a very nice representation of a color chart made out of a white card. Looks about the size of a greeting card, a business card, upon which across the bottom are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and cyan. I don't know what happened to indigo and violet. But and then a couple of different graded bars, and then a white square and a gray square and a black square and so on. It's very nice, Joseph. And there was a time when color bars mattered, and that time was back when people valued production values as a sign of quality, and that's no longer the case, which is why I want to do these iPhone things. They'll be seen by more people. They'll be of technically lower quality, but the internet is not about production values. The internet is not measuring quality by production values. It took me a long time to figure out. Nowadays, quality is measured by authenticity and immediacy. And that means that the more production values you put into something, the less effective it becomes. Lesson that I'm learning slowly, being beaten into me all the time. I think about how much time, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I think about how much time it takes me to sit down, write, get in front of the green screen, light it, get it on the prompter, upload it to the cloud, get it on the prompter, have somebody run the prompter, turn on the lights, get the camera going, get the sound going, sync the whole thing up, slate it, read it 3 or 4 times, bring these enormous 4K files into the computer, take half an hour to transfer them over, edit this thing, and then find myself looking at 7 or 8 hours of looking at Google images and reformatting them, resizing them, rendering the titles to get the flaming fire effect, and all of this stuff is keeping me from saying what I think about things when, in point of fact, to my utter astonishment, that's what people actually pay for and want to see. So it's hard for me to get there, needless to say. This is one of those many things that just has to be beaten into me until I remember it. But that's certainly the case. So it's a marvelous piece of work, Joseph, and you are obviously extremely proud of it, as you should be. Whether or not you can sell it on Etsy, I don't know. I haven't had much experience with this. The only thing I know about selling things on the internet is that I've produced the Virtual President DVD, and I've autographed many of them. And I find that on eBay, the autographed copies sell for considerably less than the unmarked ones. So your mileage may vary. Let's see what we get here. Yeah, I know I keep saying you're going to have a short show, but I really just have so much to do. Karsten Mueller says, I heard California passed a law that does punish restaurants, fast food chains, and the like for handing out plastic straws because environment and such. What's your take on it? Are they gone or short of being insane? It's true. I've heard somebody say that if a restaurant puts a straw in your drink without you asking for it, that restaurant's fined $1,000. Oh, it's true, all right. And no, they haven't lost their minds. This is another one of the big breakthroughs I've had relatively recently. Is I used to think these people must be nuts. How can they not see it? And then just like a lightning bolt, it's like, of course they see it. Of course they see it. It's not that they don't see it. It's that this is the scam. This is the con. This is the 3-card Monty. This is how it's played. Observe, we're going to put 3 walnuts down on a flat table out on the sidewalk, and underneath one of those walnuts, I'm going to put a pea. Keep your eye on the pea, and I mix them around, so on. And if they're smart, they'll let you win the first one, because then you'll up the bet. But folks, if you don't know this already, the reason you never win at the 3-card Monty, the shuffle game where you put something under one of 3 and he tries to confuse you and you're watching this thing, and you're sure it's there and he lifts it up, it's not there. The reason it's not there is because at that moment it's not under any of them. There is no pea underneath the walnut shell when you pick. There's none. He's got the thing in his hand. It's a sleight of hand trick. He's palmed it when he put it down. And now he's holding it in his hand, waiting for you to make a choice so that he can turn that thing over empty and then turn it as he turns up the one where presumably it's under. So there is no winning this game. You just can't win it because it's not a game. It's not winnable because it's not the game you think you're playing. The game you think you're playing is, can I keep my eye on one of these things long enough to keep track of where something is? That seems relatively easy. That's why it's such a popular scam. But what you don't realize is the second you agree to play, you've lost. It's over. You cannot win this because the P is not under any of those 3 when you make your decision. You don't have this is just another way of saying you may think you have a 1 in 3 chance of winning. You have a 0% chance of winning. It's not under any of these things. It's not under any of them. It's under the ones that you don't pick. That's the definition of where it is. So, back to this straws thing. So, I remember this very clearly. Back on the 1st of January, 2014, a law was passed in some parts of the city, not in others. It was true where I lived in Sherman Oaks, not true in Van Nuys, true in other places, not true in others. So I suppose it was happening on the county level. But in 2014, the people in Sacramento got up on their hind legs and talked about how the oceans have continent-size drifting seas of plastic. The earth is on the verge of dying. And so as of January 1st, 2014, you could not buy a plastic bag in Los Angeles, in Sherman Oaks anyway, in LA County. I'm pretty sure it was LA County. You would go to the supermarket and you had to request a bag. Normally, in advanced countries, like anything, east of here, you go to the supermarket and people start putting stuff into bags, but they're not allowed to. It's not that they're rude. It's not that they forgot. The law says that they cannot put stuff into bags. You have to request a bag. This is 2014. So here's the point of all this. Now, I'm a plastic guy. I always took plastic over paper because I try to make it all out in one trip. And you will not appreciate how good those plastic bags are until you have to go back to paper bags like we had when we were little children growing up, when you had to carry groceries up here like this. Because paper bags are frickin' worthless. They're worthless. Useless, terrible, horrible things. And you had to request them. Otherwise, they just assume you brought your own recyclable bag, which are filled with bacteria and cause all kinds of problems. So anyway, so here's what happened, because this is a very powerfully important story. So the super libs in Sacramento make a decree, and they decree that no one shall have plastic bags. The people that make these laws, like Nancy Pelosi, don't do an awful lot of shopping, so it's not going to affect them They don't care. That's something, Rosita will have to deal with. So they make this law. Okay, we're going to do it to save the planet. But people want to be able to take their stuff home with technology that we used to have. It's like that old line, what did socialists use to light their houses before candles? Electricity. So here's what's happened. Now, and for a couple years now, it lasted about a year and a half or something. Now, if I go shopping and I say I want plastic, I'll get plastic. And here's the kicker. I will get plastic bags, and I'll get my grocery home in plastic bags, and they're just as good as plastic bags, but they're about 3 times thicker. In other words, there's much more plastic in those plastic bags than the plastic bags they used to have when they tried to get rid of plastics. There's much more plastic in the new bags than there was in the old bags. Do you know why? Because these plastic bags are recyclable. Reusable. They're reusable bags. I've never once in my life reused one. And they always ask me, would you like one? And they charge me 10 cents per bag, by the way. It's a charge they ring up, ching, 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 here in California. So, in order to reduce plastic in the environment, the big liberals in Sacramento passed a rule that resulted in more plastic going into the environment. And this is the way it is with their gun control laws, too, with the AR-15 laws, all of it. Everything they try to do that is anti-human, anti-common sense fails. Their whole philosophy, their whole politics is politics of failure and ruin and lowering expectations and building fewer power plants rather than more of them. And we had a power go out on that hot day where I had the temerity, the unspeakable temerity, to post a photograph of my car thermometer reading 133 degrees, which cost me a lot of points in the eyes of many people. But on that particular day, we lost power. We are LADWP, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And I have lived in America my entire life, exception of a few years in Bermuda when I was younger. I've never been in power loss in South Florida, relatively frequent due to the thunderstorms. I've never been without power for more than 3 hours in this country. But as a result of that heat wave, they called it a heat storm, by the way. When they started referring to the fact that people's lights were out, they said, due to the heat storm. That sounds kind of impressive, huh? A heat storm has struck Southern California. Really? Were you able to track it coming in from the Sahara? What was the name of this heat storm? Do we name them? No, it's not a heat storm. It's a particularly hot day. Okay? It's a particularly hot day. Because a hot day is something that you'd think they would plan for. A heat storm is something that's just once in a lifetime. It's an incredible cosmic confluence. So anyway, power was out for us, for Natasha and I, was out for 38 hours. Now, I'm not so much of a baby to say that you shouldn't be able to live 38 hours without power, and I'm not one of these people, in fact, quite the contrary. I am one of those people who fully appreciate, at least on some level, the amount of effort and work and care and tireless, completely unsung work goes into making sure there is power. I'm not one of these goes, what the hell is happening? No, I understand what it takes to keep the power on. It's a big deal to keep the power on. That's why it's called civilization. But the thing about this that was so frustrating was that we were living in a little postage stamp size area that was completely black for 38 hours, while across the street people had power, and 3 houses down on the catty corner they had power. One of the reasons that entire neighborhoods had power was because they weren't on the LADWP grid. They were on SoCal Edison grid. SoCal Edison charges a little more for the electricity, and presumably, if this is what I've heard, although it seems unbelievable in this day and age, but apparently SoCal Edison takes some percentage of the money that they make off of their electric bills and puts it into maintaining, and I hope you're sitting down, presumably even improving the electrical grid. Burbank, which is an incorporated city, not part of Los Angeles County, Burbank has its own electrical grid run by the city of Burbank. And Burbank, according to somebody I know who lives here, has not had a power outage in 30 years. They're routine in the summer here. Just as a small point, by the way, One of the things that I used to lament the most about LA was this idea of rolling blackouts. That's a sign of a government that has taken more money than any other government in the United States. The fifth biggest economy in the world means the fifth biggest tax base in the world. So the California government has taken untold billions of dollars, just insane amounts of money. And they're not only not building new power plants, they're destroying them. So they're letting nuclear plants just go out of business. They're blowing up dams because of the Delta smelt, all of this nonsense. So that kind of thing made me a little annoyed. But this is California. Now, if you think that's bad, here's the kicker. I don't know if it's in 2020 or when it's supposed to happen. It's not far off. It might be that early. It might be 2019, even 2020. No later than 2022. Our overlords in Sacramento have mandated that that you will be allocated per household 50 gallons of water a day. An 8-minute shower consumes 35 gallons for one person. To which I say, oh, please, Lord, please, don't wait 2 years. Do it now. Do it now. Do it now. Tell people they have to take a 3-minute shower and cut off their water after 50 gallons. And do it right now. Because this is the walkaway movement, right? I want to say something about the plastic bags, by the way. Not that I won't be taken out of context, because we already know how that works. But just so you all know, people I actually care about and respect, I don't think any plastic should be going into the ocean. I think plastic going to the ocean is a terrible, horrible thing. I see seabirds and marine mammals and turtles and all the rest with the plastic around them. I see these, occasionally see pictures of these, skeletons of seagulls that are filled, the entire stomach's filled with plastic. That's very, very bad. We have to my willingness to have a plastic bag, my desire to have plastic bags to take my grocery home with, is not invalidate the idea that I don't think there should be plastic in the ocean. But here's something interesting. And this is one of those, we were talking about the 3-card Monte thing earlier, where you don't see it. Just take a little departure here for a second. Magicians, I want to study more about this. But there is a psychological study to misdirection. Boy, this is the kind of thing I just think I'm gonna just post it. If I tell you what it is, it'll give it up. No, I'm not. I'll just tell you what it is still. There's a video where you are asked to see how many times a basketball is passed from one player to another, to count the passes. And there's something like 6 or 7 or 8 guys running around underneath an overpass. And I'm watching them counting the passes, and I counted whatever it was, 24. They said, okay, 24. Great. That's right, 24. While you were counting the passes, did you see the guy in the bear suit walk through the frame? Not in the background, just walk right through the players? Come on. Sure enough. Look it up. Passing basketball, something in the frame, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I went back and just scrolled the video back. There wasn't a new video, scrolled it back, and right in front of my eyes, a guy in a bear suit walks between all these basketball players, goes, ooh, like this, and walks out of frame. I didn't see him. And I didn't see him because I was watching the ball, and part of my brain has filtered out, it's a gorilla, has filtered out anything that's not the ball. And this is how these kind of things work. So in that same kind of way, where there's some big, enormous thing right in the middle of the frame that you probably don't see, why is it, do you think, that we've all heard of this continent-sized island of floating garbage in the South Pacific, that everybody talks about it, that laws like this are passed to prevent it? Why haven't you ever seen a picture of it? Ever wonder about that? Because I do. Why haven't you ever seen a picture of this continent-sized island of floating plastic bags? the question isn't whether or not there's a continent-sized island of floating plastic bags. The real point is, why did it not occur to you that you've never seen a picture of this? Not one. The reason you haven't seen a picture of this is because it doesn't exist. Because if it did exist, you'd have that picture rammed down your throat every single day, and they'd be right to do it. The guy who talked about this continent-sized island of plastic bags was a young Spanish oceanographer. And he later admitted that he kind of made the whole thing up. Now, that's not to say that there isn't plastic in the ocean and that plastic should be cleaned up. Some kid came up with a really ingenious set of floats or something that uses just natural currents just to corral. It just literally just basically sweeps this stuff up. It doesn't move. The trash moves through it and just pulls a lot of garbage out of the water. I think it's great. I think all that plastic should go. I'm in favor of spending money if we need to clean up the plastic that is in the oceans, and I'm in favor of paying higher prices to do it. I'm not in favor of having it taken from me by force by taxes, but I'm certainly willing to pay more money for plastic products in order to pay for these things to be cleaned up. But they shouldn't ever have gotten into the water in the first place. One of the things that just knock you down, there's so many little factoids that are just so powerful, it's really just knock you down. But somebody told me that if you dug in the earth a cube that was 1 mile cube, 1 mile deep, 1 mile across, 1 mile wide, 1 mile tall, 1 mile wide, 1 mile deep, that you could put all of the garbage of the United States for the next 100 years into that one cube and it wouldn't fill it up. And I believe that is true. People have no idea about volume. Volume is one of those things. And we don't have any idea about size either. So, for example, if you've ever made the flight from LA to New York, you climb out of LA, turn around, start heading east. You leave San Bernardino and then finally Palm Springs behind you. And for the next hour and a half, at 550 miles an hour across the ground, there ain't nothing. Nothing. There is nothing down there. A 1 mile cube would disappear into that hole without you ever being aware of the fact that it even existed. And that would be all of the garbage that the United States produces in a century. Somebody just happened to write, Simon says, what about the vastness of space? You don't have to take a risk or waste rocket fuel launching the stuff into space. Take it out and bury it. It's not so hard. Take it out and bury it. Over time, virtually all of it will decompose, and the stuff that doesn't decompose will be useful to the archaeologists of our insect overlords, who I'd like to remind that as a member of the media, I can be useful in helping them to round up other humans to serve in their underground sugar caves. So when the ant archaeologists of 1,000,000 years from now decide to go looking at human society, they'll have some cool stuff to discover. It's not so hard, It's not so hard. It really isn't. This is the thing, we have the technology to do so much. We have the will to do nothing. This is not the future I had counted on. It's not the future of this office. These pictures back, it's always hard for me to, those pictures there. Yeah. Sid Mead drawing atomic cars and nuclear this and nuclear that. We were talking about the heat and the water. Well, here's some shocking news, Jerry and Nancy and Gavin. I hope you're sitting down. As it turns out, this is going to seem so weird, but as it turns out, an astute observer might pick up the fact that the state of California borders the Pacific Ocean along its entire western side. The Pacific Ocean is the largest body of water in the world. Drinking water and irrigation water can be obtained from salt water, but it requires a little bit of power. And power can be produced essentially endlessly by nuclear reactors that are not capable of melting down. It's not a question of, hey, this pump won't fail, China syndrome thing, the pump failed or some valve or something like that. Okay, that's an engineering mistake. Chernobyl was if a nuclear reactor is a fireplace, Chernobyl was a fireplace built in your living room without a chimney around it. Fukushima was designed to survive a 9.0 earthquake, and it got hit with a 9.1 or a 9.2. All of those reactors are capable of releasing a great deal of radioactive waste, although, needless to say, people in Chernobyl paid a big price for it. But if you were one of the people very close to Fukushima, I used to ask this question when this was going on occasionally. If you were one of the people within 20 miles of Fukushima, as far as I'm aware, and you went up to the average kind-hearted Californian and said, do you think we ought to airlift those people out of here? What do you think about the idea of us flying families from Fukushima here to LA or California for a while until things calm down? This is a great idea. Let's do it. And then you have to explain to them that they're going to take more radiation on the flight than they would staying where they are, because get up to 35,000 feet and cosmic rays become a factor. Not a problem on a trip, needless to say, not a problem even for pretty frequent flyers, but for air crews that are up there all the time, it does increase your cancer risk. Well, I bring all this up to say that with things like thorium and that kind of thing, what did I say, 3 Mile Island? I might have said something different. I meant 3 Mile Island. So look, the future I was told was coming was this. We would have a nuclear power plant that pumped water from the ocean into nuclear-powered desalination plants, and we would irrigate the desert. And all of Southern California would have more. We could grow rice in Southern California because we're not going to run out of water because it's the Pacific Ocean. And for those of you that think that you can take enough water out of the Pacific Ocean, even if you just chuck the salt back into it, no. No idea of volume at all, none. My understanding is Lake Baikal in Russia, pretty small-looking lake, is so deep that Lake Baikal has more water in it than all of the Great Lakes combined, which are very, very large but not so deep. Volume is strange. So here's what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't want dolphins to choke on plastic six-pack binders. I don't want to see sea turtles, in plastic bags. I don't want to see seagulls that have eaten nothing but plastic caps, although in the case of seagulls, there is something to be said for evolution in that regard. But nevertheless, I don't want to see that, and I don't have to. My conservative values do not conflict with my fundamental desire to live in a clean environment. On the contrary, they drive it. So we could, if we had, it's not like we need a technological breakthrough. It's not like we need to spend money on research. If only we would cut the binds that we have shackled ourselves with, if we'd only just pull up the stakes like Gulliver and just sit up, we could have unlimited supplies of clean power where it's not a question of if something fails, the plant melts down. It never melts down. It can't melt down because it never gets so hot that it melts down. And they never concentrate the heat in such a tight area as they do with the uranium plant. The thorium plants they're failsafe. And failsafe is an important word. I used the word my whole life, failsafe this, failsafe. I didn't really get it until somebody explained it to me. An engineer explained it to me. Failsafe is something that when it fails, it goes safe. That may seem obvious to engineers, but it's not obvious to regular people. Failsafe means that if the thing breaks, it breaks in such a way that no one gets hurt. A great example of a failsafe system would be an escalator. If an escalator, as the immortal Mitch Hedberg, who I miss dearly, having died of a drug overdose many years ago, but as Mitch Hedberg said, the nice thing about an escalator is it ever breaks down, you get stairs. Sorry for the convenience. An escalator is a fail-safe system. An elevator is not. If an elevator fails, if it's a cable elevator and the car goes down, that's bad. If it's a hydraulic elevator or any other kind of elevator gets stuck between floors, that's bad. But fail-safe is fail-safe, and thorium is fail-safe. And as Radiated Alfalfa Cakes, which is a very awesome name, says, mentions the movie Failsafe, which I cannot recommend highly enough. There are two films from the 60s that not many people saw, both about the Cold War, both about Cold War disasters, and they're both just terrific. One of them is Failsafe. Some of you have already guessed the second one. Failsafe is the story that Dr. Strangelove was based on. It's a story of a U.S. bomber that gets the A bomber wing gets the command to go. It's a false signal. They don't get the recall order that they're supposed to get, and so they go in and hit a target in Russia. They hit Moscow, as a matter of fact, with nuclear weapons. Henry Fonda plays the president. I'm about to ruin the movie for you. Temporarily stares, sorry for the convenience. Yeah, that's what Mitch said. So in Failsafe, the system fails, and it doesn't fail safe. And there's a real chilling scene where the president is helping the Russians shoot down this bomber. That we're giving them all the information we can because it's a mistake. And the Russians think we're playing with them, so they go chasing the wrong thing, and they don't take our advice. And there's like sounds of somebody shooting himself in the Russian command center. So Henry Fonda, who's the president of the United States, calls the U.S. ambassador, and he explains to him what's happened. And it's a very, very powerful scene because you never, ever, ever, ever see this guy's face. But when he comes on the phone, you can hear it in his voice. This guy was told 3 minutes ago, there's a nuclear bomber, American bomber, heading to Moscow, and it's going to drop a hydrogen bomb, and you're going to die in about 20 seconds. It's about that much time. So you can hear it in his voice. And then just before he makes the call, Henry Fonda asks one of the technical aides in the Air Force, he says, what can I expect? They said, well, sir, the second that weapon detonates, given the ambassador's location, there'll probably just be a tone heard, and that tone will be the sound of the wires in the phone fusing together. So the guy calls up, he says, can you hear me, Mr. Ambassador? Yes, Mr. President. His voice is just tremendous, just beautiful piece of acting. Can you describe what's going on there, Tom? He says, well, I can see and hear the anti-aircraft rockets are going up. They're launching every anti-aircraft missile there is around there's a glow in the east. Me. Woof. Awesome. Tremendous movie. Scared the daylights out of you, and it should. Larry Hagman, that's right. Larry Hagman played the hotline interrogator. As a matter of fact, Failsafe is a very interesting movie because Failsafe, it's not a 60s movie. Well, maybe I missed something. It might be a 50s movie. But in any event, it's a black and white movie. And the thing that's remarkable about Failsafe is I really can't, if you haven't seen it, please, please, please watch the Henry Fonda version. And one of the reasons to watch it is because it's a perfect example of how a good story happens in your head. There is no special effects. There are no special effects in the movie that I'm aware of. There's a couple scenes of bombers, and they look really crummy, as bad as in Doctor Strangelove, but there are no special effects. You don't see the rockets going up to intercept the bomber, but you do see it. You see it in your mind. You don't see the flash, but when you hear that tone, boy, it's worse than seeing the flash. The entire movie basically takes place between two really good actors. The whole movie is predicated on two good actors, very good actors. Henry Fonda and Larry Hagman, who was in I Dream of Jeannie and on Dallas, J.R. Ewing and Captain Nelson. And Major Healy. Was it Captain Nelson? Major Nelson? Major Nelson? Doesn't matter. It's been a while. Anyway, it's great. And the whole thing happens because the Larry Hagman is the translator. The audience hears a little bit of the phone, and the Russian side of this movie is in Russian, and we don't understand it. I still don't understand it after 2 years. So we hear the Soviet premier, the chairman, on the phone speaking Russian, but we don't know what he's saying. And Larry Hagman is doing the translation, and he's trying to get it right, and it's a very difficult thing to act because you don't get to just say the lines. You have to pretend like you don't understand the lines, process the lines, translate the lines. The next thing you know, the next line is on. It's brilliant, brilliant, brilliant scenes. And the whole movie takes place between these two actors. And Henry Fonda, basically covers the line and says, Don't just tell me what he's saying. Tell me what you think he's feeling. Does he sound angry? Does he sound despairing? Drunk? What is it? What is it? Tell us. And it's just fantastic. And what they do after that is fantastic. The ending of the movie is just unbelievably powerful. And Henry Fonda has to make, I think, probably the toughest decision I've ever seen in film history. And he does. It's very, very good. It's very, very, very good. And the other one, I love how this show just gets off base, so here we go. The other film from that same period that not many people have seen is called The Bedford Incident. Another movie that's basically done with acting. In other words, you are given a real scare, an absolute scare. You live in this perpetual state of extremely high anxiety, which is also a fun movie, of extremely high anxiety because of the performances of actors in a set, and a pretty simple set. Not a lot of special effects in The Bedford Incident. The Bedford Incident is about an American destroyer called USS Bedford. And it's captained by Richard Whitmark. And interestingly enough, since it's NATO and it's in the mid-60s, on board the destroyer, Richard Whitmark has with him a U-boat captain from World War II, from 20 years earlier. And the reason he's got that U-boat captain there is it's part of the NATO cross-training, and these guys in the German Navy after his 1968 West German Navy. So he's riding on board this American destroyer, but it's a brilliant dramatic device because you never see the Russian sub. You see it. Maybe you see the periscope or you see the sail, but you never see the Russian sub commanders. You never hear the sub people. You only see the sub is like Jaws. It's like a thing. It's the MacGuffin. It's driving the story. It's this unseen object that is the focus of all of the attention, but you never spend a moment on board. You never see Russian officers, none of it. So in the way that Failsafe handled it, the way they portrayed what the enemy was thinking in Failsafe was through the interpreter. He's telling you what the enemy is not only saying, but what they're thinking. In Bedford Incident, it's the 60-year-old former U-boat commander who's telling the destroyer skipper what is going on in the mind of that sub's captain. What is that sub skipper thinking about? And Richard Whitmark plays this guy who's just really completely driven, absolutely overdriven, pushing his people. He's proud. He's got a tremendous record, and he runs a very, very tight ship, and he's pushing people, and you start to think they're pushing him too hard. Wally Cox, I want to say, was one of the key things in that. I'm not going to ruin that one. And Wally Cox was wonderful in that movie. Everybody thinks he's kind of a underdog. He was very, very good in that film, and it's just super, and just super. And another one of those endings that make your blood run cold. Just make your blood run cold. I'm glad my Russian wife is listening to this because I'm sure she had a similar situation, wondering when the American missiles were going to come down and basically destroy everything. And I certainly had that feeling through most of my childhood, once I got to America, certainly. And I remember very distinctly being at a party in 1980 and saying, if we can make it out of the 80s, we might have a chance. But I really, truly, most Cold War kids, if you're a certain age, I did not think that there was going to be a future. I just didn't think it was going to happen. I didn't think we were going to get to the year 2000. I thought for 10, 15 years that it was just going to go boom. And it didn't go boom. And I suspect that the reason it didn't go boom was because the theory might have been correct. This is something you never, ever hear a lib even discuss. But I suspect that the theory might have been correct, that nuclear weapons made major war between Western powers, simply unthinkable. It made it full on, all the way back to the World War, a thing of the past. Somebody once made the interesting point that the interesting thing about nuclear weapons is that nuclear weapons take out the commanders and the politicians back home before it takes out the soldiers in the field. So instead of sending out 19, 20-year-old young men who think they're invincible and immortal, going to live forever, the problem with nuclear weapons is the 60-year-old men that make the decisions are not immune from the consequences. It's not like King George sending his army out to the colonies. It's not going to affect King George's personal skin one way or another, but yeah, the Cuban Missile Crisis was very close, apparently, and people say it's as close as we got. I've heard anecdotally from a couple different people that most of us owe our existence to the fundamental humanity of a Russian officer. The story goes something along the lines of, forget the year, I want to say 1987, but I can't swear to that. It was relatively late in the Cold War. There was this Russian officer who was commanding a Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile installation. And this actually happened. This is not a movie. And he's on his watch one day or one night, and all of a sudden his radars light up, and he sees inbound American nuclear warheads. And once it's confirmed on radar that that's exactly what they are, they got their track, they know where they're going. He doesn't have discretion. It's not like decide what to do. Once this guy is sure that these missiles are inbound, he needs to launch his missiles because those missiles are coming to take his missiles out. It's what we used to talk about as a decapitation strike. If blue team can nuke red team first, they can take out most of red team's ability to hit back. That was the idea. That's what everybody was afraid of, and if you're a military man, it's good to be afraid of that. So this Russian, actual real-world Russian commander, and somebody's going to give me the name in a second, I know it, is sitting there in a bunker, and he sees American missiles coming for his silos. And something in this guy said, I can't believe it's true. Not in a panicky, hysterical kind of way. In the most rational, cold-blooded, best sense of the term, manly kind of way, he said, I do not believe that it is possible that this is happening given, look, if NATO armies were inside Russian borders, that'd be a different story. But he said, no, I don't believe it. And he decided to wait. He decided to wait until there were confirmed reports on the ground of nuclear weapons from America hitting Russian soil, and when that happened, then he was going to launch. Well, they never got that confirmation because we never did launch our missiles, needless to say. The whole thing was a simulation error, that it was running a simulation. I think it's where war games came from. The Soviet radar programs started running a simulation without anybody knowing about it. But the commander didn't know that. Needless to say, the first thing that this guy did was to tell whether or not is this a drill? No, it's not a drill. This is real. And one guy basically said, I don't believe it. I'm not going to launch. Now, there's something else you need to understand about this. In the U.S. Air Force, that guy would be court-martialed. There's a chance even he'd be executed, I imagine, although not much going to be left after that. But in the U.S. military, not launching like that would have been as big an offense as you can get in the military. But in Russia, in Soviet Russia, him not launching was a death sentence. It was a death sentence for him not to launch. He knew that the only way he was going to live through this, he actually had a better chance to survive if he launched. He probably could have survived the nuclear attack. And if there wasn't a nuclear attack and he launched, but he had credible things, well, we saw it on the radar. His decision was magnified by the fact that he knew that if he was wrong, he would be executed. His whole family would disappear. They would just vanish. They'd be gone into the gulags if they were lucky. So some enormous monumental act of humanity saved us all. And the place I'm starting to get to is, I'm looking back on it, I couldn't see it in the middle of it, but looking back on it, I suspect that once it became clear what the stakes were, that virtually everybody would have made that same decision. And that's why I think it never happened. I've given it some thought, actually. You know, if I was the president of the United States, I saw this, where did I see this in recently, very recently? That was another old movie with, it was with Martin Landau. Dawn's Early Light or something like that. But if I'm the president of the United States and all of a sudden somebody wakes me up and they say there are 12 inbound Soviet ICBMs and they're heading for Washington, New York, Chicago, and so on. And then I get a call from on the red phone from the Soviet premier who tells me that that it's an accident. I'm going to lose 100 million people, 60 million people, something like that. They're gone, and they're going to die one way or another. This is not the situation we were talking about before. We're talking about an actual launch, missiles on the way, but by accident. 12 of them or something like that. Not the whole 25,000 that there were or whatever. It's just, here come 12 nuclear missiles. And they're going to take out all your cities. And it's an accident. So what do? If you launch 12 missiles back, the Soviet premier says, this was the exact case in the movie that I saw, Dawn's Early Light, or Rocket's Red Glare, something like that. But basically, that's the scenario, and it's a really interesting moral question. The Russian guy calls the American president and says, we have launched 12 missiles by accident. It was a rogue commander or whatever. We did not intend this launch. We are not following up with the launch. There are no missiles coming after this. So you have three options, Mr. President. You can do nothing, or you can launch 12 missiles of your own, which we will not retaliate on, or you can go all the way and launch everything, in which case we're going to launch everything. And the guy gives him the option, basically says, I understand that we're going to kill 50 million of your people, and I'm telling you that if you kill 50 million of our people in retaliation, and that's all you do, we'll call it square. So on some level, it completely relieves the president of the moral burden of the decision. The Russian premier has already made the moral calculation and decided that since they were in error and since he'd like something of Russia to survive, he's going to tell the American president, instead of just ending it all with everything, if you respond with the same force that we accidentally hit you with, then we won't take it up a gear from there. And so the question then becomes, what would you do? I mean, what would you do? I have given this a great deal of thought. And I cannot see any world where I would launch those 12 missiles. I don't see any world. Likely that would mean I'd be torn from the White House and ripped to shreds in the streets. And I think that's certainly an understandable response. It's how I felt after 9/11, certainly. But if you ask yourself, okay, so 50 million people have died because of a mistake. Now am I going to kill another 50 million? And it's weird how a consistent moral code can give you answers to things, because I likewise have thought about this too. And my feeling about seeing a full-scale attack would be, I would definitely launch. Absolutely, I would. I would definitely launch. If it was a premeditated, all-out Soviet strike, inbound, confirmed, on the ground explosions, in that case, I think I would launch. And I think I would launch because I have to think that I would launch. It's not a bluff I'm playing with myself. The whole system, the whole balance depends on that actual moral equation, doesn't it? That's really kind of what it depends on. That's what the Soviet colonel or whatever went through. it's pretty much that. If it's an accident, yeah, by dawn's early light. Thank you, Dave Big Booty. If it's an accident, then retaliating is just murdering people for no reason. And you could say that, well, eye for an eye. I don't see it. I don't get it. But at the same time, I'm not gonna let the communists simply destroy America and get away with it. So it's strange how that moral code can give you answers to things like this, because they seem so contradictory. I'd launch in the case of a big attack, but I wouldn't launch in the case of an accidental attack. I think that you have to be able to make the launch decision, or else you don't deserve to be president. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever, that Barack Obama would not have launched under any circumstances whatsoever. None. It would not have happened. Did Powers Booth just die? I just see R.I.P. Powers Booth. I know he dies in the movie. Did he die in real life? Oh boy, I know him. I got a chance to know him, not super well, but I spent a fair amount of time with him. He was so good in Deadwood, and I saw Powers Booth at a small lunch, and Powers Booth asked a question. I want to say it was a question of Frank Luntz. And he asked Luntz a serious question, and Frank Luntz gave him kind of a cavalier, off the cuff kind of an answer. And Powers Booth basically said, "No, I'm asking you personally, what you personally will do." And oh man, I can't believe he's gone. A year ago. That's very sad. After it was over, after I saw this, I saw him at an event later, and I said, "Hey, Powers," which is just a cool thing to say, by the way, just to be able to walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, Powers," because it's the greatest name in the history of the acting profession. And I really admired him. He's a great actor. He's a patriot, a conservative, and a patriot. You'd be pleased to know he was a conservative and one that was willing to stand up. That's why he was giving Luntz so much crap, because he felt that Luntz was asking them to go out there and die on the field and without anybody backing him up. But I said to Powers, I said, Powers, I saw that look you gave Frank Luntz, and I hope you take this the wrong way, sir, but when you're really angry, you could curdle water. Because that's what that looked at. That's, well, it's life. It's not like it's a personal loss like we were talking about earlier, but I am going to miss him. He was, first of all, the voice is unmatched. It's just low, unmatched voice. Same woman really also married for 48 years? Is that possible? Yeah, Powers Booth was a patriot. He hated this whole Hollywood thing, and he was ready to stand up for it. And I really admired him, and it was a signal honor for me, and a big high point in my life to get to know him and a few other people like that. But that's a shame. But yeah, but there's anybody who saw him in Deadwood, there's a menace to him. He's kind of almost beyond villain, really. Powers Booth almost was like could almost play like an evil vapor, almost like, the kind of miasma that they used to think the plague was caused by, just bad air coming out of the ground. And Powers Booth had just so much power. He had so much intensity that was slow burn intensity. I never saw him much raise his voice. Yep, so look at that. Married to the same woman from 1969 to 2017. Good for him. But he could just be so smolderingly evil. And he was great in Sin City, but the best Powers Booth was within Red Dawn. He was the fighter pilot, the F-15 fighter pilot, I think. But actually, the best I think Powers Booth has ever been was considerably earlier. He played Jim Jones in the Jonestown movie, dramatic movie about Jonestown, and it was flawless, a flawless performance. And watching this movie, I was still very young. I was, I just want to say it's right around my high school, 77 when it happened, so maybe the movie's 79, somewhere in there. But Powers Booth was playing Jim Jones, the cult leader, and Powers Booth played him so well that you could get the sense of why people would just willingly go out there and commit suicide and kill their children in front of their eyes just because he said to. That's a shame. Here's to you, Powers. He's up in heaven drinking scotch and eating steak and smoking a cigar right this second. I'm going to answer one more question, only because I glanced down. It's not on the list or anything. It's just something that I've always felt was kind of interesting, and it's prepared to nerd yourself out. And the question comes from Alo Conson, who wants to know, is the transporter from Star Trek actually a death box? Some might argue that when Captain Kirk's I'm not going to get into the description. We basically, we've seen how the transporter works. And that is a question I've always wanted to deal with. So we're going to end on a little bit of an up note here. Is the transporter in Star Trek a death box, a death experience? And the answer is 100% yes, it is. Yes, it is. If you really get into the whole idea of the transporter, it gets to be some very, very profound psychological and philosophical ground, because the transporter is basically, you stand on the pad and you are disintegrated. It's like the disintegration chamber in that episode of Star Trek where the two planets are at war with computers. You walk into a room, you stand there calmly, and you are disintegrated. You are physically destroyed. You are turned into atoms, into plasma. And while this beam is disintegrating you, exceedingly sophisticated sensors are recording the position, presumably, of every atom and every state, every physical, mental, electrical state in your body. That information is encoded and sent someplace where your body is reassembled from different molecules. So even if it's reassembled out of the same molecules, doesn't matter. The process of being transported means that your physical body is disintegrated and another body is built at the other location. And this brings up some very interesting plot holes, for one thing. Which I think they addressed in one of the Next Generation shows, the one with Scotty, which was actually, I thought, one of the best things they did. And somebody's talking about Barkley. I know Ensign Barkley, by the way, too. He's a great guy. Gosh, his name just slipped my mind. He's a conservative radio talk show host. I love him. He's fantastic. Only coward in all of Starfleet. He's great. So basically, here's what happens. You walk into that booth and you die. You are reassembled someplace else. Your consciousness goes with you, and this is the point where it gets interesting. So it doesn't feel like you die because your consciousness travels, but your physical body does in fact die. And here is the giant, enormous plot hole. And if you've ever played a computer game, you know exactly what I'm about to say. Every time you get into the transporter, it's like a save point. It's like a save point in a game. You're playing a computer game and you can hit save, or you reach a certain level and it saves the game, so that if you die, when you die, you don't go back to the beginning, you go back to the last save point. Dwight Schultz, yes, he's a great guy. And that's what the transponder is. It's a save point for people. So in other words, if Kirk has all of his atoms burned away turned into information, and that information is stored and then transmitted someplace else to be reassembled, then all you have to do is record the information, and you can reassemble Kirk any way you want to. You can beam him down, basically disintegrate him on board the Enterprise, and then theoretically, you could set the program to create 200 million Kirks, which would be an awesome thing to do, by the way. Every single person in Starfleet is James T. Kirk. There's nobody else, just nothing but James T. Kirk. So yes, as Bone Canoe says, Captain Kirk has died. Oh, it's a shame. He's not going to remember anything that happened during the last 4 days when we regenerate him from his last transporter session. So it is a death box, but it's also an immortality box. Now, presumably, as you get older, the information updates because it's updating your memory, so all of the physical impairments that come with age also go with you. But that's a small price to pay. So if you're Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise, your consciousness has this experience. I beam from the Enterprise, next thing there's a glimmer, and I'm down on the planet with the white ape with the giant unicorn horn. And I don't survive the encounter. The last thing I see is this thing on top of me with bloody claws ripping my face off. And then it gets dark. And then I wake up in the transporter room on the USS Enterprise. I have no memory of beaming down to that planet. I have no memory of the white ape. I have no memory of the mission. All I remember is I stepped into the transporter where I was going to go to Starbase something or other, and now I'm back in the transporter room. And I wake up to find that I had actually lived for 3 or 4 or 5 days prior to transporting last, that I went on this mission and I was killed on this planet, but I have no memory of that. I remember stepping onto the transporter room on the 1st of September, and then waking up in the transporter room on September 8th, and in the time that has elapsed, I was killed. The Mugatu, yeah, that's right, cool. So, your consciousness is what travels. And Soingularity, that's hilarious. Soy boy ad, Soingularity, I got to remember that. George, if that's soy boy is a term used to give to these, these girly men that have taken the place of real men in our culture, like pajama boy, too much soy, so soy boy. So that episode, and somebody said Cold Day in Hell when I give the Next Generation credit, but this was a brilliant idea. It was a brilliant plot idea. Unfortunately, it's such a brilliant plot idea that it has made the entire Star Trek universe not make sense. Because in that episode, I didn't really see all of it, but Scotty's on board a ship that's dying. It's out in the middle of nowhere. He's just in the middle of nowhere, and the ship's running out of power, and there's not enough power for life support, not enough food, none of that. So Scotty basically sets things up so that he gets himself dematerialized, and he's kept in the transporter buffer, and then all the ship has to do is just maintain those memory circuits. That's it. And so, 100 years later or whatever it is, Enterprise D comes along. They find this derelict ship. They find out that there's the computer's still active, that there's activity in the transporter buffer. They plug in some jumper cables essentially, and then Scotty emerges, and he's basically spent 100 years in limbo. It's cool. So the transporter is a death machine. It's also an immortality machine, and it's also a photocopy machine. If I step onto the platform and it records all of my information, including all of my consciousness, then it makes me appear somewhere else. It could make 2 of me appear or 5 of me. I could appear in a room and see 10 of me, and we're all having the exact same thought. We're just looking at the room from different perspectives. And all of us are the same guy. We all have the same exact genetics. We have the same memories. There's just 10 of us who are we're not even clones. We're more than clones. We're photocopies. We had the same brothers, same lives. No one of us is the master. It's not like one of us is the source and all the other ones are clones. We're all equally, uniquely the person that stepped onto the platform, but now there's 10 of us, or 100 of us, or 1,000,000 of us. So, anyway. I love those kind of questions just because they're kind of fun. That's going to do it, I think, for this episode. Normally, I put the Stratosphere Lounge up before I go to, but I'll do that too. I just need to get the link for the GoFundMe thing. So again, Jim, deepest condolences on your loss, and you certainly have the thoughts and prayers of everybody who's associated with this show, as you can see from the comment section. And again, if there's anything I can do for you, let me know. And at this point, I think we're going to shut down the YouTube stream, and then we'll shut down the rest of this stuff. So, whoa. Oh, I thought I set that alarm for 10:30. I set it for 8, but my God, I thought it was 10:30. That would have been a bit of a shock. So now it's time to shut down the various and sundry multiple command centers here. So first thing we'll do is we'll say goodbye to our YouTube fans. Thanks for joining us, and we will hopefully see you next week.